Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's Friday Morning GM with co-host Vas Larikos. Vas, how you doing?
Doing great. Really looking forward to Super Wildcard Weekend, where we can sit back and relax and see how the playoffs begin to unfold without the stress of the Ravens playing this week.
Very much like the bye week a few weeks ago, where the Ravens got a lot of good news. In fact, they got good news pretty much in every time slot. And all of those AFC news specifically is going to be dealt with by the early game on Sunday. It's 3 AFC, then 3 NFC. Does that make you think maybe the Ravens play on Saturday?
I guess that could be, considering that the Monday night game is between two NFC teams and they don't want to disadvantage an opponent that much, but we know how the NFL operates, and probably that schedule will be determined by the ratings more than anything.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, some big news financially for the Ravens. Couple items. One's a housekeeping item we'll get to in a moment, but the big news of the day is the OBJ restructure. It's a little bit of an odd one. A vet minimum salary for 2024, $50 million in 2025. And effectively, that becomes guaranteed on the second day of the league year, which is effectively a mechanism to release OBJ and have the void years not all hit in 2024, which is fantastic, but to kick most of that, about 4/5 of it, I believe, into 2025, assuming he's released. And I guess it's also possible he could sign a new contract with the Ravens to replace this one.
Right. They are going to buy themselves another month, essentially, to make that decision, because the decision, whether they do want to re-sign him or not, let me be clear, because the previous deadline would have been mid-February. Now it's extended to mid-March. There is an $11 million void years that will now be deferred. I'm not exactly sure how that works. You know, for guys like us, we've been interested in following the salary cap mechanisms for years, and the void years are still a little bit of a new beast. Right, to the Ravens. So we're still learning some of the nuance to that. And the other piece is this eliminates the potential for a compensatory pick from Odell Beckham, because, and I think this rule is kind of illogical, but a player on a void year contract, essentially a void year contract's a backloaded deal that you cut them a year early, but still they are eligible for the compensatory formula. But with this new structure, OBJ will not be.
Yes, that's true, and I'm not sure I'm really concerned about it. The Ravens have a number of players leaving who will get larger contracts. I don't know how much they're going to be spending in free agency, but I expect it to be largely from their own players and from the bargain bin, meaning after the draft, so that there will be no impact on the compensatory formula. So even if OBJ were to generate, say, a 7th-round pick or a 6th-round pick, I don't think there would necessarily be in the Ravens' top 4.
Right.
So I think when you look at Stone might or might not be there, but Queen will certainly be there. I guess Matabike might not be there if they tag him and trade him, which would be another one. But Zeitler is probably going to get a significantly bigger deal than OBJ. At least that's the way I would see it. Trying to think about who else I'm not thinking of. That's a free agent. Clowney.
That's the other big one. Yeah, I think. Well, we'll see how it goes. You know, the Ravens are going to want to retain a few of those guys. You know, if the price is right. I don't expect them to be bringing in many marquee free agents from other organizations, and I would. So, I think the cap space element of this is probably more valuable than the potential of that 5th. You know, maybe that wouldn't even be canceled out.
Yeah. I completely agree. All right. The other thing in terms of financial items, just some housekeeping. The NLTBE incentives, we now have a better picture of. And particularly, everybody remembers Clowney dancing on the field with the additional sack on Saturday against the Steelers. Fill us in on that, boss.
Yes. So this is courtesy of Brian McFarland. So certainly want to attribute this work to him. $7.7 million is the total earned incentives that will be applied to the 2024 cap. And there is maybe $600,000, I think he said, of offset for a couple players that had likely to be earned incentives, such as Marlon Humphrey making the Pro Bowl, that were not earned. But just to run down, OBJ, an extra $1 million, Jadeveon Clowney an extra 2.2 and a quarter. Nelson Aguilar $500K. Kyle Van Noy $100K. Geno Stone $250,000. Michael Pierce, big one, $2 million. He earned an additional $2 million. Gus earned an additional 1.1, and Ronald Darby $500,000. So that will effectively reduce the salary cap that the Ravens have at their disposal by $7.7 million. It's almost not necessarily that we thought these were all going to be earned. How likely they were to be earned is up for debate. But it is essentially another way to sort of backload some deals when you structure them this way.
Yeah, I'll toss in the notion that normally there's elements of this that I would be unhappy about in terms of NLTBEs. This year, every NLTBE that's earned was really earned. And the exception is probably Beckham, because I think his contract was too large to begin with, and certainly relative to production. And then the production level obviously was it could be relatively low to get him this additional money and backload it. He's the only one. Everybody else on that list completely earned their bonus. Pierce, most snaps he's ever played at age 31 in November. So really impressive thing, and earned the re-signing as well that we need to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. 2 years, $7.5 million deal tacked on to the end of this current deal. The structure is very team friendly. $2.5 million bonus will be spread over 2 years, $1.25 million base each year, and then there's a $2 million roster bonus for making the 2025 roster. So $2.5 million cap hit next year by my math. I think there may be some void money tacked onto that, but that's still very reasonable for the play and the production you're getting from him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the question was all, could he stay on the field? It's really never been in terms of per snap productivity for Michael Pierce. He's been a great player. The Ravens have completely sucked the cream off his career. The Vikings got whatever other putrid mess was at the bottom of the milkshake there. In the time they had him. There's certain players in the history of baseball and football. I mean, the Orioles got a fantastic 3-year run out of Roberto Alomar when he was here, and the Indians who signed him after really got the shaft in terms of what was going on with him. So I was really upset to lose Alomar too. He's one of the players I really wanted to keep in Baltimore, but then obviously he didn't keep playing as well.
Back when the Angeloses used to spend money, Alomar was one of my favorites, even despite the Hirschbeck incident. Really liked the way he played the game. Yeah, very very much. He was a guy who Roquan Smith of baseball, just incredible understanding of situational awareness. He would make that crazy play. But anyway, we'll keep moving on. Great to have Michael Pierce back. I think this probably, with void years tacked on, this may also rejigger and free up some cash from void years that were already on the deal before. Yes. Also, this was also a note from Brian McFarland. The 2028 is now a void year, so it's one extra additional. I guess they just keep pushing it forward, and they're going to try to slowly defer and spread those out, I think, as much as they can to keep the team as competitive instead of have a 1 year fall off.
Okay, I like that. I'm not happy on becoming more and more dependent upon void years in general, but every team has had to do some of this coming out of the COVID years, and hopefully, the Ravens are good now, and they need to obviously push that advantage. Dalvin Cook, another guy. I was asked a lot about it beforehand. I thought it was I was pretty much a hard no on Dalvin Cook. Where were you on this?
So I'm a little bit partial to Dalvin just on a personal level because he did play for my favorite college, Florida State. Was one of my favorite running backs a few years back. His career, like many running backs, has petered out. He was actually, I believe, the lowest on yards over expected rushing. For him, it was actually yards under expected rushing. Maybe the worst in the entire league. But now we find out Melvin Gordon had his cameo and put the ball on the turf again. So that's something that, makes Dalvin a little bit more appealing. Secondly, they had the South Florida connection with Lamar. Lamar was personally recruiting him apparently before the season even started. And third, I just always want to come back to the point that the next running back that underperforms in a Lamar Jackson backfield will be the first. So I'm cautiously optimistic that maybe you can get a chunk play or two over the next few games.
I don't think that's unrealistic. It's just Dalvin Cook had 3.2 yards per carry for the Jets.
Yeah.
I know a lot of that is the Jets offensive line. It's not a good situation there. I'm trying to come up with something positive out of this. He'd been a pretty good receiver in Minnesota, so maybe he can play a role there. I think I looked on PFF, and this is just all I have to look at right now, and see that he was not a particularly great pass blocker. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I do think, he has a little bit more juice than these Mike Davis, Melvin Gordon, and then his teammate, Devontae Freeman, or his collegiate teammate. So let's see. They're partial to these older guys, but, a guy that was a Pro Bowler not too long ago, not the worst, deep insurance policy to have.
All right. We got other good news on the playmaking front with the return of Duvernay to be designated for return from IR. Now, first of all, long time coming in terms of getting Duvernay back. And the Ravens, I think, since the loss of Keaton Mitchell, have really suffered being short a speed option. And Duvernay could be tonic for that.
Yeah, I think it's truly up. Is he up to speed? Both ways. Does he have that speed back that can bring something to the table? They don't have to bring him up. We saw that with Malik Cam. This is the 7th of 8, and I think they played it just about perfectly because they have to go in 4 weeks, and there's 4 weeks left in the season. So you can't take them with you and keep them for next year. You might as well see. Jake, judging off of the participation reports by Zarebek, it seemed that he may be practicing in full this week. I did see the most recent practice report, and there were only 5 players that Jeff mentioned were sitting out today as we record on Thursday. And, can he take this? Yeah, let's see how he looks on the field. If he's ready to go, he can take Treadwell's spot.
Right. It could do that. Not a guy who plays special teams in terms of kick coverage, but he still could be I think a useful player to the team offensively. And I'm not really thinking of him as a wide receiver. I'm thinking of him more as a gadget guy. It's not like he can't ever run a route, but the Ravens love speed in space, and he would provide some of that to them without having to use Flowers for a similar role. There was something else I want to talk to. Oh yeah. In terms of other. Well, I'm sticking with this IR DTR for a moment. You mentioned that there is no way to return at this point. Yes, there's any new injury going to IR is certainly a season-ending IR at this point. Malik Cam, who did not get activated, is a season-ending IR, and Darryl Worley, who went on IR this past week, also a season-ending IR because he would have to miss at least 4 games. So. There's no one who can come back except for Andrews and JAD for the Super Bowl at the earliest. So Andrews can come back before, JAD for only the Super Bowl. So Andrews is the one. That's who they're saving it for. And again, the rule change came this winter, but this last offseason, I really think it was actually pointed at the Ravens and their roster building techniques.
Agreed. I think it's clear. But DeCosta just continues to churn the bottom and churn IRDTR, churn the practice squad, and it pays off. And they put a little bit of an obstacle where it's not. What was it, 10 before, Ken, or was it unlived?
I think it was unlimited, and they changed it to 8.
Right.
So,
but DeCosta will find a way to navigate around that as well.
All right, let's move on. And you just mentioned it, the depth issue at safety keeps biting them in the ass, week after week. They have Worley active, and people might not consider Worley an important player because he's out there only if something goes wrong and on the back end. Well, they're walking around with Marcus Williams still not 100% healthy. He's going to play. I mean, it's very important to be there in the postseason. I think people, by the way, with Marcus Williams, how do you feel about people labeling the signing as a bust at this point?
I don't think that's true. Injuries, it's a little bit of a nuance here. Some players that have an extensive, lengthy injury history, I don't think that they're smart to sign, but he did not. I think he only missed 1 game when he came to Baltimore in 5 years before here. And then he just had 2 injuries in a row. It could happen to anybody. Is Mark Andrews a bust? Is Ronnie Stanley a bust signing? There's a long list of players. Where I do think they have gotten in trouble sometimes is giving contracts to players that have been injured a lot or even injured at the time where they give them the extension. Those are a little bit more dubious to me.
Dennis Pitta, kind of thing. Yeah.
And Nick Boyle as well.
Probably another good one there. Yeah. And I'm going to say specifically, I think there's still a very good chance that Marcus Williams comes back and maybe does not play out the 5th year of this contract, but plays 4 here. And there are people who think he's definitely gone after 3. He'll be here next year no matter what, because it's a big negative number to cut him. But Marcus Williams has tremendous per snap productivity in his first year. He's been a less of a player with his pec injury, but he's been a warrior playing through it. I think he'll get surgery after the season. I hope that means he can still be ready for the start of the 24 regular season, but I still expect him to be an absolutely central player on this defense.
I agree. And I think he could be a pivotal piece in this postseason as well. He does have that ball hawking ability, and you're in a must-win situation and you have the other team chasing points. That's when your ball hawk can get his hands on some balls.
Yeah. And he did in the Steelers game. If he returns that ball for 6, which it looks like he was in a reasonable position to do, cutting over the ball, and then of course it got dropped. Rainy day, lots of stuff happening. But
San Fran, he had the end zone interception too, so it hasn't been all bad this year for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, in the depth issue at safety for the playoffs, then if Worley is not active, and I don't believe that the Ravens should be trying to go through this postseason with 3 safeties active on a week-to-week basis. They have the ability on an unlimited basis during the postseason to activate Adams if they like. There's no limits on the number of activations, but I believe there of a player, but I believe there's still a limit of 2 activations per game.
I don't believe it. That's my understanding as well. 2 per game. Yeah, I agree with you. You have to have a 2 deep at every position, no matter what. And the Ravens have sometimes been 3 deep at safety over the last couple of years. Now, maybe a couple of those guys were primarily special teamers, but they had safety was one of the positions where they were probably carrying extra players and other teams weren't. And now they're in this position where they have injury after injury after injury. At this point, Adams probably, or is it Pepe Williams using this bye week to reassimilate to the safety position and give him some depth that way?
That's possible because he's played a little bit during the preseason. I think Ardarius Washington would be my choice of the 2 guys there. But the position that the Ravens cannot allow themselves to be put into is activating only 3 safeties for a game, or even activating only 3 safeties for a game. That would be going without Adams and having Stone and Williams, having some tenuous injury situations, and being forced into a position where Hamilton has to play on the back end. You don't want to make bad, utility decisions based on being cheap at the edge of the roster. And I don't mean in terms of cap dollars. I mean in terms of how many you activate at that position.
I agree. And then last few weeks, they've been kind of cycling through sort of a extra special teams only linebacker, whether that was Josh Ross for a couple weeks, Jeremiah Moon, who's now been promoted to the 53 after using up all of his call-ups. That might be a player that you don't necessarily need. I would rather have that depth at safety.
It's a great point. They can cut Moon now, and he did play a lot of snaps in the last couple of games, actually specifically in the Steelers game. He played a lot of snaps at outside linebacker. But he is a guy you can cut. Nobody's going to sign him away from you. You re-sign him to the practice squad, and then you elevate him whenever you think you need him during the postseason. But his utility is all there. You don't have to keep him on the roster for the postseason. He'll be there for the Super Bowl if the Ravens are there. He'll get a ring because Bisciotti is really good about giving rings to practice squad players. So there's nothing about that he's going to miss out on, other than maybe playing in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they have some options there, but I would agree with you that is the Worley injury is a something that could be detrimental. Hopefully it's not, but it does leave a weakness.
We have one question related to that. I might as well get to it right now. That's from Alvin C. Says, if Jeremy Lucien was elevated for the game against Pitt, would that have any effect on his clock with the Ravens? Meaning, would he still have 4 years left if he played last week? Maybe a reason they didn't use the elevation. Actually, it wouldn't. I've discussed this with Brian McFarland. He'd have to be active for 6 games. So Lucien is one of the possibilities. He was re-signed. He was released by the Ravens, then re-signed, a week or two ago. And he's back in the building, back available. And if they thought he was better than Adams, they could bring him up. And if they thought they needed him in addition to Adams, they could bring him up for that reason. So they have either way as a possibility. And I guess if you're really looking for the most likely chance that he gets on the field or gets on the roster active for a game day, it'd probably have to be another injury at safety for that to occur based on the current roster. I think they'll go with Adams basically the rest of the time.
I'd be surprised if he got his first taste of NFL action in the postseason. Yeah. But yeah, a player hopefully that can be one of those depth pieces for next year.
Yeah. Yep. Excited about that with Worley and Stone potentially both moving on. Well, we've had a lot of activity, and today the news announced with Bill Belichick and the Patriots are mutually parting ways. Not unexpected, but it did happen, and I guess it was unexpected to some. The Patriots have some internal coaching candidates. Gerard Mayo has been a name that's been talked about, and Mike Vrabel, also a name obviously closely connected to the organization from the outside. But we always look at this from a Ravens point of view here. How does this affect McDonald, Monken, Weaver, losing any of those guys?
Right. So there's currently 8 jobs open in the NFL, which is 25% of the league, about average for these days. And it does seem like maybe a little bit of an end of an era with Pete Carroll and Nick Saban from Alabama and Belichick all departing within a few days of each other. So far, Mike McDonald has been requested to be interviewed by the Titans, the Panthers, and the Commanders. Todd Monken by the Chargers and Panthers, and Anthony Weaver by the Falcons and Commanders as well. So I looked at a hot board, a CBS head coaching hot board before the end of the regular season, actually. So it's not completely accurate, and they're not the most plugged in. But they had Mike McDonald as I think there was the 11th most appealing candidate on their list. And they had Monken, I believe, about 15th, and they didn't quite have Weaver on the list. So, it's so hard to peg what names are really coveted by these owners and franchises and which are just kind of constructs of the media, building something into that. I think if you follow the interviews, that's a pretty good way to do it. But this is a pretty good class or crop of head coaching candidates, even with potentially John's brother Jim coming back to the league after winning the national championship.
Yeah, good possibility there that he'll get a job, and he may stay at Michigan, but the NFL he might want to win a Super Bowl in addition to a national championship. I always thought that was something he'd want to do. But let's one person asked me, how about handicapping the possibility of losing 0, 1, 2, or 3? Because that's really the numbers that they could lose. I've got a percentage chalked down for each of these. Maybe I'll go to one more question, then we'll come back to this. And let's compare percentages on that because I think that'd be fun. All right. Sure. You got another question here. Roger Crawford says, if Flacco goes far in the playoffs, do the Browns keep him? I know Watson will be owed a lot of dollars and the potential distractions could hurt team chemistry. Do they just let Flacco go or keep up the great product? I think he's talking to us.
I think it would be tough for them to keep Flacco because Watson has that, fully guaranteed deal. And the last time Watson played on the field, he was the only quarterback really this whole season to test the Ravens defense. And then, of course, he's out for the year. Then again, Flacco seems to kind of, odd bedmates in Cleveland there, but they seem to really be enjoying each other lately. Even Flacco's father was comparing the crowd experience and said that it was better in Cleveland, which a little unusual this week.
Oh, yeah. That is nasty. Totally unnecessary too, by the way. Right. But anyway, I think it basically comes down to two things. The first is money, because Joe Flacco will probably have other options that might be a middle class contract for a quarterback. I don't think he's going to make $25 million a year anywhere, but I think he could make 10 to 15 million. So some team that is either rebuilding, has a young quarterback under contract, wants a good backup. The Texans come to mind as a team that might want him because they've got C.J. Stroud already, but maybe they want a good backup, and maybe they don't like their current backups who have gotten some playing time. But there's other teams in the NFL that might be in that situation. And I think factor number 2 for me is whether or not Flacco himself wants to play for what we talk about, a second division team, or he needs to play for a contender. And if I were Flacco and I'm 39 years old next year, I wouldn't have any tolerance for going to Carolina, holding clipboard, teaching somebody else to play quarterback, even if I got paid handsomely for it.
Right.
I'd want something else. Yeah.
That wasn't really his MO when Lamar was here either. He wasn't necessarily that big brother figure. That's just not his personality, and that's fine. I would be surprised as well. If I had to guess, I think this is Flacco's kind of ride off into the sunset. Got to come in late in the year, get some headlines, get the comeback player of the year buzz. He was out of the league until November. Yeah. So there's no guarantee he wants to come back. If I was him, I'd probably say, let me ride this as far as I can go. And that's probably my final salute to the NFL.
Now, let me give you one other possibility is Flacco does the exact same thing next year. He avoids training camp, keeps throwing a little bit, at least to keep that arm talent up, and injuries mount. The replacement level drops in the NFL for quarterbacks, and all of a sudden Flacco becomes a name everybody's banting about because of what happened in this George Blanda-esque season of him coming in and saving the Browns season, frankly. If that were to happen again, I could see him going wherever, and that may be an optimal strategy for him.
I was just going to say that probably makes a lot of sense for him. Wait and see where you're needed around the midseason, preserve your body, and start slinging around. Just be the replacement man, almost like a Clowney, but 2 months later. That kind of thing.
Very good, and he'd probably command more money doing it the next time around. So that'll be interesting. All right. Let's see. We do have one other question, and then we'll come back to our percentages. So if you're working on that, sure. This is from Brad McGowan. He says, Stanley appeared on the Lounge podcast last week and shared that while dealing with injuries has been tough, he still believes his 2019 form is reachable. Given that we've seen veteran linemen play themselves back into form, and given we've seen top LT play into their mid-30s, Whitworth, Trent Williams, for example, and given Stanley seems to be stabilizing some after a tough early stretch, what are your thoughts on possibly extending him at this point?
I would be very apprehensive to add more time, more years onto the back of his contract because we have no way of knowing how long he's going to be able to play or at what level he's going to be able to play. And it's been a series of injuries and issues for the last several years. The only way I would restructure the deal is if he just takes a straight pay cut. And we've had some players do that before. And I think you can go to Ronnie and say, hey, we signed you to be our franchise player that plays 100% of the snaps. Your body is not capable of doing that anymore. So for playing 70% of the snaps, we're going to give you 70% of the contract. I think you can make a reasonable case without offending the player that in his unique condition, he's made a lot of money. He can do the team a solid and return the favor a little bit.
I don't think that's completely unreasonable. I think what we might see is a OBJ style restructure. And I don't mean an immediate cut is on the immediate horizon and then that void years, trigger over 2 years, yada, yada. Not that. More like what you're saying, where he takes I would think a pretty small pay cut for 2024 because he's got $8 million of savings the Ravens could do for cutting him. But maybe they claw back $2 million from his salary. And then they also restructure him with void years to create much more cap room on his contract. And I don't know exactly how much that would be because I'm not looking at his current salary next year. But you could also move some of those future years into void years as well. And potentially that could be a way to stretch out the pain from cutting him and also a way for the Ravens to kind of show commitment to him for at least one more year.
His annual per year is 19.8, and we know it was backloaded from the start. Just originally, he hasn't been restructured since, thank goodness. But I would assume it's probably the mid-20s is the cap hit. I think it's the number one cap hit Well, maybe not. Maybe Lamar's probably number one on the ledger next year. But we saw with Michael Pierce 2 years ago, and they went to him and said, "I'm not Michael Pierce, Brandon Williams. Excuse me, got my nose tackles confused for a second." And they said, "Hey, Brandon, we've had you here for a long time. We've restructured you. We've done right by you. We're the team that drafted you. We need you to take a pay cut." And he did. And maybe you can structure it in a way with Ronnie where it's playing time based for and build in some of those not likely to be earned incentives, and you're essentially doing the same thing as far as pushing it down the road. But if you can't play, he doesn't get that at all, and if he can, he gets it back. I think that'd be a pretty fair way to do it with him.
Yeah, and then I'd like to know how much money otherwise is restructurable. But by the way, I think you're also right anyway that Michael Pierce, they went to him and they cut his salary and also took a year off his contract. And half that's biting the Ravens in the ass. They'd rather still have this around.
Now they put it back on. It back on. But it's low. I was surprised only,
good price.
2.5 mil. Very good price. So Ronnie Stanley, it's been a tricky one. Ordinary, if he was fully healthy, his contract probably would have been restructured 2 or 3 times by now.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're back to the coaching question. And so it's the possibility of losing 0, 1, 2, or 3. I've got probabilities for each of those. And we're talking about McDonald, Monken, and Weaver. Of course, everybody would love to have Weaver be the next head coach somewhere in the NFL who gets a chance because the Ravens get 2 draft picks. It doesn't always work out the way you want it to. I also think, people who say that are being a little bit cavalier about who Weaver is within the Ravens organization. I think he's a great defensive line coach. I think he does things very well. His ability to relate to the players, despite clearly being an intellectual, is something that I think is remarkable. I mean, he's not too old. He gets right in there with the players and goes in very physical drills with them, sometimes without pads. And he's not doing that by accident. He's sending a message to these kids and really trying to tell them, you need to man up here.
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario would be 2, and that would be hypothetically McDonald takes a head coaching job and brings Weaver to be his defensive coordinator.
Ooh, yeah.
That would be the 2. But I think Harbaugh has enough clout and probably enough, behind the back room in the cigar room deal made where Weaver knows, hey, if you stay here, and then maybe McDonald takes Denard Wilson or somebody else. So that's my lowest probability. I had that only at 10%. I'm going to say there's a 60%. So we're taking – these are the 3 options. Divide 100% by all 3.
0, 1, 2, or 3. 4 options, actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't do everyone leaves. All right, well, let's just split it then and say, I don't know. I don't think that'll happen. I don't think they could absorb that. I would say, let's say 5% all 3 leave, 10% 2 leave, and then I'll go 15% 0 leave. But the one that I think is most likely is that one of these coaches does leave. And I was looking at the candidates. So yeah, I think you definitely had Jim Harbaugh, Ben Johnson from the Lions, Mike Vrabel from the Titans, and Bobby Slowick, the Texans offensive coordinator. I think they're all ahead of McDonald. But once you start getting into the 6, 7, 8, I think there's a pretty decent chance that either McDonald or Monken leave. From a team perspective, it's tough because I think McDonald is a superior coordinator. But Harbaugh's had a better track record of hiring DCs than OCs. So it's hard to say whether I'd rather have Monken or I think I'd rather prefer McDonald. But
McDonald's Tay, right?
Yeah,
McDonald's Tay, yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I would agree 100%. Yeah. So my percentages are somewhat different. I say 1% all 3 go. And I didn't really consider the possibility of McDonald leaves and takes Weaver with him. But then thinking about that, if Weaver could be the DC in Baltimore and be in that role, it's kind of like better because I'm thinking because he can't really take the head coach role from McDonald with McDonald being so young. At least I wouldn't think that. But maybe stranger things have happened. He's certainly not taking it from Harbaugh here easily in this organization. So maybe that's spurious on my part. But anyway, 9%, 2 of them go. 45%, 0 and 1. I say there's an equivalent chance they lose 0 or 1.
Okay.
So I think that there's more already set in terms of internal hires. There's more already set in terms of unknown candidates. And there's more guys out there that we're not considering candidates, but they're still candidates on some people's list. And Jim Schwartz comes to mind as a guy who might be back in a head coaching job.
Yeah, there's several. There's some rumors of a reunion of Dan Quinn to Seattle.
Yes.
He coached there for a while. There's a lot of there's an offensive coordinator from Tampa, Canales, I believe is his name, who's generating some buzz. A lot of players, but I do think McDonald is somewhere in that right outside that top 5, and Monken might not be far behind. He might be a fit in Carolina if nobody else wants to take that Panthers job. So. We'll see.
That's an interesting call, and there might be some things about bringing in an offensive guy. People have often pointed out is more valuable than bringing in a defensive guy.
Right.
And so offensive coordinators tend to get a better chance. But I think the big thing going against Monken is age. Like you're not building a dynasty, Harbaugh, Tomlin, Belichick, young Belichick type hire if you hire a 57, 58-year-old guy. So you really want to get a guy right around 40 or even a little bit younger. To be your head coach if you can, if you want to really catch lightning in a bottle and have a 20-year head coach.
Yeah. And now with Belichick and Carroll out, Harbaugh is propelled to the second longest tenured head coach after Tomlin, right? Tomlin was only 1 year before him. And I would have to imagine, I won't go on record, but got to be one of the longest. It's becoming a little bit of a year-to-year sport nowadays, especially in college with the unlimited transfers coupled with the NIL money. It's like almost every single collegiate player is a free agent every single year.
Yep.
And you're turning over 40% of your roster. You're turning over the coaches. The coaching carousel in college keeps spinning and spinning. And it's impacting the NFL a little bit, I guess, too. And even the way that the Ravens and Derek DeCosta have built this team this year, it is a little bit more mercenary-based, I would say, with some big-name guys, Clowney, Beckham, even Dalvin Cook. It's becoming a year-to-year league, and the stability that Harbaugh has brought is the counter to that.
Right. They've got lots of good youth stability on this team, even though they have 43% of the snaps or whatever it is now leaving in free agency at the end of the year. So, but I don't disagree with you about it becomes harder and harder. That said, 3 weeks ago, or maybe it's 4, the Steelers fans all basically had Tomlin fired for losing consecutive games to 2-10 teams at home. And now it looks like he's probably going to get extended. So it is a very quick turnaround.
It seems that coaches that have the more input on personnel they have, the more under scrutiny they are. And it's been very few of these coaches that have the GM and head coach hats that succeed. Even Belichick, even Carroll. We saw, O'Brien in Houston a couple years ago. There's been a lot of them. Rule, the first one they hired in Carolina, almost none of them work out. It's better to have, I think, the divisional labor there. The coaches pick the coaching staff, and the GM has the final say on personnel, and Mike Tomlin can continue hiring inept offensive coordinators, and we'll all be happy.
Yeah, it is a really good system, and we've got Bisciotti to thank for that, because he could easily have fallen in love with his head coach or fallen in love with his GM, either way, and made them the more powerful person in the organization. I don't like strong head coach. I like checks and balances, and I think Harbaugh's judgment on draft picks has been flawed enough that it was really been good to have somebody like Ozzie and somebody like Eric DeCosta to kind of check him and say, well, hold on, A and B and C and D. Gruden is another good example of one who was strong, super strong, coach over GM rule. And boy, did that not work.
Oh man, Davis still owes him what, 70 million or something, right? But he only made it 2 years, and it was 10-year contract, 10 million guaranteed every year, right? Was it 2 years or 3 years? Anyway, it wasn't very long.
Yeah, it was absurd. So, Voss, always a pleasure doing this show with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online or contact you or read your work.
Sure. Well, my pleasure, Ken. I am the co-managing editor and also an author for Baltimore Beatdown blog. You can find me on Twitter at Vasilis Beatdown, Vasilis Beatdown. And I encourage anyone to check out a new podcast we've been doing this season called The Ravens Way at Ravens Way Pod.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there who'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. This is a great week to get one in. I've got about 3 going, some really cool ones today and tomorrow. One that came out already about whether or not we'll see more designed runs from the quarterback in this postseason. So it's a good risk question that I think is coming in. So anyway, really appreciate you folks doing it. If you want to do us a favor and you like the content Vas and I are putting out, write us a 50-word review on this. It would help a lot, and it'll drive people via the algorithm to check out this podcast, and it's very helpful. If you can't do that, just show someone else the pod and how to get to it, and we really appreciate that as well. For Vas Laricos, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on Friday Morning GM.